Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. Into December, this time of year, it is going to be the college football playoff rankings, which dropped on Tuesday night from the selection committee. At this point, we talked about it on Monday's show. I believe that there is essentially 11 spots that have been sealed, okay? And I'll be quick here because we already talked about it. But the 5 conference champions, that's going to be the ACC, SEC, Big 10, Big 12, Mountain West champions, they're in automatic bids. I believe that the SEC and Big 10 losers are going to be in. So that's either Oregon, Penn State, Texas, Georgia. Both of those are going to be in. So that's 7 teams right there. Notre Dame is 8. Indiana's 9. Ohio State's 10. Tennessee is 11. And so I bring it up because it feels like those 11 have solidified their spots regardless of what happens. And now the big question coming into Tuesday was what happens to that 12th spot. It feels like the only team that could potentially get that spot that's playing this weekend, if SMU loses in the ACC title game, they would certainly be in the conversation. But from there, it really comes down to 4 teams for 1 spot. And what was interesting coming into Tuesday night, none of them play this weekend. And so it felt like whoever was in pole position was going to ultimately get that spot. And then beyond that, there's nothing anyone else can really do to move ahead of them. The committee, by the way, confirmed that after the rankings were released. And so I bring it up because coming into Tuesday night, the big question was pretty straightforward. You had 4 teams for 1 spot, assuming SMU wins this weekend. They are the 3-loss teams in the SEC, Alabama, Ole Miss, and South Carolina. And you had Miami in the ACC as well. And so it's an interesting time. And what made the playoff conversation interesting on Tuesday was who is going to be the highest ranked out of all of them, because basically it's going to unofficially seal probably a college football playoff berth. Well, as you can see on the screen, the rankings are out. Alabama moves up 2 spots to number 11. Miami tumbles to number 12. Behind them are number 13 and number 14, Ole Miss and South Carolina. And so on the one hand, it's interesting. On the other hand, it feels like it has unofficially clinched Alabama a playoff spot pending an SMU loss or pending an SMU win on Saturday. And let me say this. I don't know if Alabama is the right team or the wrong team, but what I do know is I hate the way that the committee got here, and I hate the fact that one team was not rewarded for playing a very tough game on the road and winning on last Saturday. That team, the South Carolina Gamecocks, they go to Clemson, their big in-state rival, number 12 in the rankings coming into that game. South Carolina gets the win, and essentially it means absolutely nothing for their playoff resume. As a matter of fact, producer Matt, go ahead and pop up my tweet from Tuesday night after the playoff rankings got announced. My tweet, I said this. So let me get this straight. A win over top 12 Clemson on the road, which feels like a pretty big piece of a resume, especially this time of year, moved South Carolina up 1 spot. A win over a 5-6, now 5-7 Auburn team at home moved Alabama up 2 spots. The rig job is in. So I tweeted that out on Tuesday night. I got a lot of reaction. Now, let me say this. Do I truly believe that the committee has rigged the college football playoff? I do not. Do I truly believe that there's no argument for Alabama coming out of this past weekend to be the top 3-loss team in the SEC? I cannot say that I don't believe that there is no argument. As a matter of fact, I'll take it a step further. There's actually a very strong argument because Alabama has the head-to-head win over South Carolina. What I will say is I am sad, disappointed, and frustrated that South Carolina beating a top 12 team on the final weekend of the regular season essentially meant nothing for their playoff resume. And I think this is a black eye and an embarrassment for the playoff committee. And I'll be transparent. I also think this, to me, speaks to brand bias and why, even in a 12-team playoff era, the big brands in this sport, Alabama, Texas, whoever, Ohio State. And I'm not saying Ohio State or Texas got the benefit of the doubt on Tuesday, although some would say Ohio State did because they'd still be hosting a playoff game. But I always believe big brand bias is going to impact this sport. I always believe it is going to impact these rankings. And I believe we saw it all firsthand on Tuesday night. Why do I say that? Well, let's go ahead and dive in. And first of all, Tuesday, what it really reminded me of, and it's not going to be a huge surprise. It reminded me of, transparently, March Madness, NCAA tournament, and the questions that I get from all of you in the lead up to Selection Sunday in college basketball in March. I get so many questions over the course of February into March of, Torres, my team's an 11 seed according to Joe Lunardi. Can we get to a 10? Can we get to an 8? My team is a 1 seed. What do we have to do to lock up a 1 seed? And what I always say is it's impossible to know because until the resumes are totally completed, it is hard to really know. And it is hard to have an understanding of what other teams are going to do and how things are going to break down. And so from my perspective, that's my frustration with what the committee decided to do on Tuesday night. Not that they moved up Bama. Bama was already ahead of South Carolina. But it is kind of curious that Bama is the only school that is ahead of Miami. And of course, all 3 SEC teams won on Saturday. South Carolina certainly had the most impressive win as Alabama and Ole Miss both beat 2 of the worst teams in the SEC. Sorry, producer Matt, Auburn was kind of stinky this year. It's the truth. But the point I'm trying to make, all 3 teams won. South Carolina had the best win by far, yet Alabama is the only one that moved up past Miami. Miami falls, but ahead of Ole Miss and South Carolina. To me, that doesn't make sense. And to me, my frustration is pretty straightforward. Why did South Carolina play that game? And that was a huge part of their resume. Listen, if South Carolina had beaten Clemson in the first week of September instead of the last week of November, that would have been one of the headlining things on their resume. Same with any big team beating any other team out of conference or early in the season. Like, we don't penalize, like we give credit as an example for Alabama beating Georgia a million years ago. We give Georgia credit for beating Texas. We give Ohio State credit for beating Penn State. So why did South Carolina get 0 credit for beating a good Clemson team, a top 12 Clemson team on the road on Saturday? They moved up a grand total of 1 spot, and the only team that they passed was the team that they beat, Clemson. That feels like a huge part of South Carolina's resume. And if I'm a South Carolina fan, I am furious. And to me, this is where the brand bias comes in. Because you can say that South Carolina should not pass Alabama. Alabama has the head-to-head win. I'm not even going to argue with you on that. You could argue that South Carolina shouldn't pass Ole Miss. Ole Miss has a head-to-head win over South Carolina. I'm not going to argue with you on that. But let me ask you a simple question, and let's play the game of brand bias and how it impacts things like this. Let me ask you a simple question. Let's say, hypothetically, instead of playing Auburn on the final weekend of the regular season, Alabama played LSU. Actually, let's take Alabama out of this. Let's go in a different direction. Let's say this. Let's say that Michigan was ranked number 12 in the country and Ohio State was ranked number 15. If Ohio State went to Michigan and beat Michigan, now that won't happen because it'll never happen under Ryan Day because Ryan Day is the head coach of Ohio State, but that's another conversation for another day. But if Ohio State was ranked 15th, if they go to Michigan and beat Michigan on the final day of the regular season and Michigan is ranked 12th, regardless of who's ahead of them, You think Ohio State is only moving up one spot? Give me a break. By the way, it's the same with Michigan if Michigan beat Ohio State. By the way, it's the same thing if Notre Dame and USC. If USC was ranked 12th and Notre Dame was ranked 15th, you think Notre Dame's only moving up one spot going on the road and beating a rival? So we're not giving Clemson or we're not giving South Carolina the benefit of the doubt. We're not rewarding them for a key part of what the committee basically said was that the resume, that nothing changed on their resume. That is what the committee told us on Tuesday night. And beyond that, I'll just say this, because I think it's been a big topic with the playoff committee, with these rankings every single week. Why are we punishing teams for playing good games, especially out of conference? Wasn't this the conversation in a different manner with Indiana a few weeks ago? And I heard it from 5 different SEC fan bases. Indiana hasn't played anybody in the out of conference. They canceled a game against Louisville that they could have played. So why are we rewarding them for that? Well, South Carolina is kind of the exact opposite. They scheduled, because of history and because of whatever, a huge game late in the season that should have helped their resume. And it did absolutely nothing. And so I only bring it up because if I'm Shane Beamer, now Shane Beamer seems too nice. I saw an interview he did with Dan Dockich where like Dan Dockich was kind of poking him and trying to get him to talk smack about Alabama or Ole Miss or whatever. And Shane Beamer wouldn't take the bait. But I just bring it up because if I'm Shane Beamer, you know what I'm saying today? If I'm Shane Beamer, I'm going to the podium and saying, you know what? Clemson game's off. We're not playing Clemson anymore late in the season. We'll play Coastal Carolina. We'll play Eastern Illinois. We'll play Central Connecticut. We'll play some directional school that means nothing because playing Clemson the final week of the season meant nothing for our resume. Maybe we move it up to earlier in the season. Maybe we eliminate the game altogether. But why are we playing this game late in the year? And why are we not getting rewarded? And why, by the way, is Alabama moving up 2 spots and ahead of Miami? But of course, South Carolina only moves up 1 spot. It makes no sense. I don't care what the committee says. Listen, again, for an Alabama fan watching, I'm not saying that South Carolina should be ranked ahead of Alabama. As a matter of fact, if I was the committee, if I was a one-man committee, I would probably have the SEC teams in that order: Alabama, Ole Miss, and South Carolina, because both teams have the head-to-head win. But what I will say is you have to reward South Carolina for playing this game and adding a key piece to their resume. Again, if Michigan or if Ohio State beat Michigan on the road, they're not moving up 1 spot. If Alabama beat LSU on the road, they're not moving up 1 spot. If Georgia and Texas had been this weekend, you mean to tell me Georgia's moving up 1 spot? It ain't happening. So I'm a little bit frustrated. I'm a little bit disappointed. We'll see what happens this weekend, but it sort of feels like the playoff field is set. Ward Manuel, the head of the college football playoff committee, basically acknowledged. He's like, look, the teams that aren't playing this weekend, there's nothing they can do to improve the resume. Now, I'll be honest, I think that's kind of dumb if we're being perfectly honest, because what if, I'm just saying hypothetically, what if Georgia beats Texas by 40 this weekend? You mean to tell me that win by Alabama and Ole Miss isn't more impressive? What if, by the way, Georgia loses by 40? Doesn't that diminish a little bit Ole Miss and Alabama? And it's not just an SEC thing. What about Oregon and Penn State? Penn State upsets, or if Oregon beats Penn State by 40, kind of diminishes what we thought was a great win for Ohio State. So I could go on, but the bottom line is this. I am disappointed in the committee because it just feels like South Carolina got zero credit for getting a great win on the road that should have boosted their resume, and it feels like it did nothing.